So my name's Jade and today I'm going to be doing the book recommendations tag. I wanted to do like a fun tag video, and when I looked, this one just flooded the feed, so I thought I want to have a go. I will link the original creator down below. I mean, the premise of this tag is fairly obvious. We're giving book recommendations here. Number one is a book you tell people is your favourite. I have two go-tos, not because they're my only favourite books, but because they've kind of just become my personality trait by this point. I'm gonna go with the answer I gave the last time someone asked me this. They asked me what my favourite book was and I was like, huh. And they're like, okay, what's your favourite like genre? What's your favourite book in that genre? And I said, well, I like fantasy a lot, so I guess I'll go with The Starless Sea by Erin Morrison. I mean, this is also one of my absolute favourite books, like tippity top 5 for sure. I have a tattoo on my arm that is a quote from this book. I just love it. It was one of those that I'm hesitant to recommend though, because it's weird. It feels like you're falling down a rabbit hole. It's a book that if you're a book lover, you'll love it, I think. The writing is stunning. Erin Morrison also wrote The Night Circus. She's great. She's only written the 2 books and I cannot wait for anything else she writes in the future. I love this book. Number 2 is a book that is your guilty pleasure. I'm one of those people that like, I don't see the point in guilty pleasure books. Like, I don't feel guilty about anything that I read. I think if we want to go down the stereotypical route of like smutty books, then the only like really hardcore smutty books I read are the Katie Robert books. I really like the Dark Olympus series, but again, I don't feel guilty about reading those. I'd feel pretty comfortable explaining them. Maybe the dragon one a little bit less. Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert, which is about a dragon and a woman getting it on. Still, like, I still wouldn't feel that guilty explaining it, but I guess it's the closest thing. Like, it's the thing that maybe I'd feel the least comfortable explaining. Also, like, a guilty pleasure implies that you really like it, and I don't know that I really like The Dragon's Bride. It was fine. I'm trying to think of books that I read like in that guilty pleasure way, you know, when you just like consume it and you can't hold back and you just love it and it's your every waking thought. I think Christina Lauren might be that for me. Like, I read quite a few of their books. I read Inner Holidays in 2021 and I read My Favourite Half Night Stand this year, but the rest of their books, all of like from here to here, can you see that? Does this mean anything to you? I read last year. So they're kind of like a guilty pleasure author in that I just get through them so quickly. I always find them addicting and entertaining. If I had to single out books in particular that gave me that feeling, I think The Unhoneymooners and Love and Other Words and Dating You Hating You. My top 3 books. Maybe not Love and Other Words because that one's a little more depressing. Maybe we should just call it The Unhoneymooners and call it a day, because I don't think I can answer this question adequately. Number 3 is a book everyone loved but you didn't. I have to recommend a book that everyone loved and I did. Like, I don't quite see how that's a recommendation, but I'll go with it. First thing that came to mind was Grady Hendrix. I have read 2 Grady Hendrix novels, Horror Store and My Best Friend's Exorcism. I actually read this one first, and I think objectively they both have such fun premises. Like, I really wanted to like both of these. They're packaged so coolly, this one on the inside particularly, but then this one looks like a little VHS, so they're both stunningly wrapped. They're so playful and fun in premise, especially Horror Store. I found I think I prefer this one just a little bit, though I can understand why a lot of people like My Best Friend's Exorcism more. I think objectively that one's stronger. I just like the playfulness in Horror Store. Both of them I found to be pretty predictable though, and both of them a little bit lackluster. I just didn't get it. Like, this one particularly to me was just like a very stereotypical like plot arc. Like, I knew I didn't see the point. If you are maybe a really big fan of The Exorcist and you grew up in the 80s, I don't know, maybe there's some kind of nostalgia factor here that I was missing out on. I will say I am probably going to keep going with Grady Hendrix. The vampire one, that's the one that I really want to read. Also The Final Girl Support Group, which is on Scribd, so I'll probably get around to it at some point. And his newest one, How to Sell a Haunted House. That's an interesting title, I cannot deny. So I'll probably get around to reading more. I'm not sure I get it. Oh, you know what? I have an even better answer actually than Grady Hendrix. This one. This one. My friend really liked it as well, and obviously it is so hyped. All of her books are, and I read Ugly Love years ago and I enjoyed it, to be fair. So I'm not gonna judge all of her work off of this one book. At best, fine. I read it really quickly, it was addicting, but I got really frustrated by it. and then there was the extra bonus chapter, and at first I thought, oh, this has an interesting spin on it, I quite maybe like it more, and then something happened and I was like, no, 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 what are you doing? Number 4, a book that you read the fastest. Now I'm a slow reader, so the fastest for me is if I've read it in a day, then that automatically makes it the fastest. And I have read some books in a day. The only 2 that are coming to mind though, I read both of them for school, and I purposely read them in a day to kind of get it over and done with so that I could be ahead for my class. I kind of feel like that doesn't count, like it wasn't genuine. I'll mention them anyway. That's Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. I audiobooked it and I listened to it all day. This is the other thing. If I read a book in a day, or like it's not in one sitting, I physically cannot do that. If I read it in a day, that's all I'm doing that day. And then the second one is Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I also audiobooked. Normal People is one of my faves though, so there is that. So I want to give another answer for this one because I feel like they don't count again. But I'm gonna say I Killed Zoe Spanish by Kit Frick, which is covered in fingerprints. I read this in 2 days. That's really quick for me. That is genuinely quick. I was working on those 2 days. I will mention I was reading it every moment that I could read it. Started it like the first morning and that was it. I was hooked. Could not put it down. I had to figure out what was going on. It's a mystery. It's a YA mystery. The beginning, Anna admits to killing Zoe Spanos, and then we jump back in time and Zoe lives in this one town that she's never even been to before. She's just going to this town for the first time and she doesn't even know who Zoe Spanos is. She's like kind of slowly piecing together that she went missing. So how come we get to the point then that she admits to killing Zoe Spanos? Like I had to figure it out. It was so intriguing and I was stumped for so long. It took me like half of the book to come up with like a plausible theory. I will say I did figure it out in the end, but I was just hooked. I was addicted. I could not put it down. Number 5, a book that you think deserves more hype. Again, I have 2 go-to answers for this one, but I feel like one of them has slightly more hype than the other one, so I'm going to go with the even lesser hyped one. And that is All of You, Every Single One by Beatrice Hitchman. I genuinely loved this book. It was in my top 10 the year I read it. I think I read it in either 2020 or 2021. I'll link the video where I discuss it down below. It would be like one of my favorites. It was just so beautifully written. It's a character-driven story. We're following a host of characters. It's historical. I think it's Vienna, 1911. We're following majoritively a host of queer characters. We've also got some mental health things. Freud comes up a couple times. He's a character in this book, and I found it so endearing. I give it a 9 out of 10. The only thing I could maybe say is I don't know how I feel about the end, but I also, standing here right now, I don't remember the end very well. It's so good and I never hear anyone talking about it. So if you're looking for historical fiction, following queer characters, character driven, if any of that ticks any boxes for you, highly recommend picking it up. 6, a book that is being adapted into a TV show or film. There is one obvious answer for this one, but I'm gonna hold back because I think I might mention this book later on. And actually I read a book recently purely because it was being turned into an adaptation, so I don't know if this is like necessarily the strongest recommendation. I didn't love this book. I enjoyed it. It was okay, but I wasn't obsessed with it. And that is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know, it feels like blasphemy to say that I didn't love a Taylor Jenkins Reid book. Evelyn to like current times, I love all of those. This was the first of her like backlog, if you will, that I've read. I enjoyed it. It was fine. It's about a woman who gets a call in the beginning of the book from her husband who was presumed dead, and she's now like moved on and as a fiance, and so then you go back in time and you figure out how we got to this position. And it's an interesting concept. It's very emotion filled and you feel for all of these characters, and it's being turned into an adaptation. It does look like it's gonna be turned into more of like a rom-com, light-hearted style adaptation, possibly, maybe. It's got a great cast. It's got Philippa, I want to say her last name is So, from Hamilton. She played Eliza, and the 2 guys, the one guy, the Australian one, was in that like holiday film. The other one was in the Marvel one. I'm forgetting all of the names. I'm really excited to watch it though. 7, a book that you reread the most. Again, I'm not a huge rereader. I feel like I'm so lame. Like, I don't have any guilty pleasure books, and I don't read books quickly, and I don't reread books. I have reread some books, but there's always been a reason behind it. It's never been purely because I want to reread the book. Like, I read the first book a million years ago and I want to read the rest of the series. That's what I did with Illuminate and with Throne of Glass. Or I read the book a while ago and I can't remember it and I want to refresh it before an adaptation comes out, like Conversations with Friends. But funny story, I never actually watched the adaptation of Conversations with Friends. I reread it last year and I still have yet to watch the show. I'm glad I reread it though, because I wasn't sure how I stood with it, because I enjoyed it the first time round, but that was before I'd read Sally Rooney, so rereading it now, I can confirm that it's probably also one of my favourite books. And I'm currently reading Daisy Jones for that exact purpose, and Daisy Jones is also one of my favourite books. And to be fair, I really love the Illuminati Files and I really love Throne of Glass, so maybe there is something in this, maybe I need to be rereading more books. Then I remembered Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell. This came out in 2019 and I've read it every year since it comes out. Every October I read it. It's so cute, it's a graphic novel, it's got the coolest colour scheme, and it's just cozy, autumnal friendship. Like, it's just so good. It's so cute. It gives me the feel good. I mean, I read it every year, obviously. I love it, and that's not a tradition I plan on ending anytime soon. Next up is a book from a genre that you don't read very often, and my mind went to horror because I don't read a ton of horror. Those two Grady Hendrix books are like 40–50% of the horror that I've read. But then also of the other horror books I've read, none of them particularly stand out. Like, I wouldn't recommend them to you. The closest one that I could come to would be Misery by Stephen King, which I enjoyed. I read it a really long time ago though. I don't particularly think about it very often. I remember thinking it was somewhat lackluster compared to how much everyone raves about King, but then it's more of a thriller, I think, is the problem. So we're not going with that answer. I don't like that answer enough to go with it. We're gonna go with sci-fi, because I don't read a ton of sci-fi, like compared to all the other genres. I feel like I don't reach out for it very often. And I don't know what I've known this for years. You'd think by now I'd just like start picking up more sci-fi, and I have yet to. But every sci-fi book I've read, bar one, I've loved. Really, I need to read more sci-fi. If I had to recommend one, oh, it's between two. The one that I've read the most recently and is playing on my mind the most actively, Dune by Frank Herbert. It's so intimidating, and I know the film's come out, but read the book anyway. It was so good. I was so expecting not to like this. I thought it was going to be really dense and hard to get through, and I knew it was written a little while ago, and it's like a big long series, I think, and I was just so intimidated, and I loved it. I found it so fascinating, the politics and the world. I've since read the second book in the series and I really enjoyed that one as well. I have full intentions to keep reading the series as a whole. The film's okay. I didn't love the film, I didn't hate the film, but it cuts out some scenes, and those scenes were such great scenes, so read the book for those scenes that the film cuts out. Number 9, a book that deserves all the hype it gets. I mean, my Goodreads review for this one was literally, it deserves all the hype, and that is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. That's the biggest way I feel about this book, because it got so much hype. It came out last summer, I think. Everyone and their mom was talking about it, and it is a weirdly funny book. Despite the title, it has this weird dark humour to it, and it's so well written, and the way it evolves as Jeanette ages. And I listened to the audiobook and she narrated it herself, and I thoroughly recommend it. You thoroughly recommend something? I highly recommend it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It deserves all of the hype that it got. And I love the colour. I'm not a big yellow person. I don't like the colour yellow, or the colour pink for that matter, but there's something about this colour that I love. Number 10, a book that you usually recommend when you get asked for recommendations. This is such a difficult one. So personal and genre based, and it depends on how much you've read. Are you used to reading a lot? What genres do you like? What kind of narrative style do you like? All these things matter. So I normally go for something that's like accessible, both in that it's easy to read and also that it's like easy to get through. Like, it's kind of addicting and you don't have to think overly hard, but also that it's accessible if they're not like a hard reader. There's no crazy narrative stuff going on. I feel like Taylor Jenkins Reid is a good shout for this one. I think Evelyn, Daisy Jones and 6 is the one that I'm gonna say if I had to give it Taylor Jenkins Reid, purely because it's my favourite. It's the one thing with this one though, the narrative style is written in interviews. I've never read it like physically with my eyes. I've only ever audiobooked it. Like I said, I'm currently rereading it now, and I would recommend them to get the audiobook because it doesn't feel like you're reading a book. It feels like you're listening to a documentary or a podcast or something. I just think everyone should read it once. It's such an interesting journey. It's got so many really important and interesting themes in here. Another one that's very similar to what I said earlier about like it's accessible and it's easy to read, and it's, if it were to be put into any genre other than like contemporary literary, I think it would fall into like mystery, maybe thriller. And that's Room by Anna Donoghue, which is also one of my faves. It's from the perspective of a little boy, and so because of that, the writing is particularly accessible. But it's also really clever because obviously the way he interprets the world versus like what's going on with the adults around him is quite serious topics. He was born and raised in Room, and then his mum breaks him out of Room, and like it turns out that they've been held captive. Got some troubling themes, definitely, but because it's written from the point of view of this 5-year-old boy, it's also got this lightness and this joy, and I just found it so addicting. I could not put it down. Number 11, a book that has your favorite characters. Again, how can I pick like one set of favorite characters? I can't. I'm caught between two different authors, but I think I can get away with answering one of them for the next question. So I'm gonna go with the characters from Skullduggery Pleasant. Skullduggery Pleasant is one of my absolute favorite series. It's technically children's, but I think it verges on YA, definitely, at least in the end. I also think anyone can read it. They're so much fun. It's about a skeleton detective and his 12-year-old psychic. There's magic, there's mystery, they're solving crimes in the beginning, but then it ends up arcing into this huge like fantasy plot, and the stakes are really high, but then there's still always, I feel like, at least a little bit of touch of that mystery element. I mean, we're following a skeleton detective, and it's got such a fantastic cast of characters. When I think about them, it feels like going home. I first read this series when I was 12. I'm now 24, so this series has been in my life for 12 years. They're so fun, they're so snarky, they're all incredibly capable and kick-ass, and they're so good. Even the bad guys, you kind of root for them at times because they're so good. These are my favorite characters. Number 12 is a book you wish you could live in, and if you're wanting to live in a book for anything other than the characters, I mean, good for you. I've heard the prompt a lot, like a fantasy world you'd want to live in, and the only reason I could think I'd want to live in the fantasy world is if I could be a magical creature or to be with the characters. Like, I don't care about any other reasons why. So I'm gonna say Sarah J Maas. Which series is the question, not Crescent City. I think Crescent City the world would probably be the best because it has technology. You get like the best of both worlds, but the characters in that one I find the most frustrating right now. The question is, do I want to live in Terrasen or do I want to live in Valaris? I mean, it depends again, am I human in this scenario? Because if I'm human, then I don't think I want to live in Valaris. I think that's a little sketchy. I mean, I guess I don't have to live in Terrasen. I could live in Dornell. I do like Dornell. I like the way it was described. It sounded a bit sketchy, sure, but it sounded colourful. It sounded interesting. I suppose I could like move around. I could go to the southern continent as well. I think I'm gonna go with Thornica. I'm gonna travel around and meet all the different characters. That sounds like a lot of fun. Love to visit the southern continent. I think that might be my favourite setting of all of Sarah's books, period, maybe. 13, a book you thought you would hate but ended up loving. I mean, other than Dune, obviously. Again, I always think back to school books because you're kind of forced to read them and they're books that you'd never pick up on your own. You read them and you're like, oh, I actually really like this. There are a few that all in the same class I didn't think I was gonna like. Jane Eyre was another one, proved wrong. And the one that sticks out the most is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I've always wanted to read Lolita. I've always found it intriguing. I assumed it would be really dense and just like hard to get through, but the writing is stunning. It's so beautiful and lyrical, and it's got this, again, this weird humor to it. And I did it in class. No one else mentioned the humor though. They all just talked about how disturbed they were, so I kept that one to myself. And it is obviously a really horrific topic, but it's so fascinating to like get into this character's point of view, like psychologically, and it's so well written, and I just completely fell into the book. I was captivated by it. If you don't know what this is about, it's basically about a pervert who kidnaps this young girl who he deems Lolita, although that is not his name. The covers of Lolita, they're not good. They're always so bad. Like, why we're just emphasizing the wrongness. I don't like the covers of Lolita. This is the best one I could stomach. Number 14, a book that made you cry. I normally have loads of answers for this one. I wanted to give you one that like made me sob, Recently what's been happening is I've read a lot of books this year that have made me cry, but I've just teared up, I've gotten emotional, and then I've moved on. I've not sat there and sobbed. I cannot remember the last time I sat and sobbed reading a book. It might be The Knife of Never Letting Go. That was traumatizing. So I sat and I thought about of the books I've read this year, which one made me cry the most. I think The Wonder by Emma Donoghue might be in the running, but the one that came to mind was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. We're following a group of women who live in a bunker underground, and they don't know why, they don't remember how they got there, and it's a kind of dreary book. Just the ending, it really upset me. And I saw it coming. We know this is how it's gonna end, but I just think it was so well written. The hypotheticals around this, right? The philosophy and the thought tunnels you go down thinking about this girl who, I forgot to mention, we're in the point of view of a person who was a girl when all this happened, so she doesn't know anything else. This is all she knows, and she's trying to like imagine what the world was like beforehand and what like men would be like and all these different things, and it's just, oh, it's so good. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely sobbed a little bit at the end. Speaking of sobbing at the end, the next prompt is a book that you wish you could read for the first time, and my answer for this one is The Song of Achilles. This is the other one. Remember the beginning of the video where I said there's two books I go to when I say what my favorite book is? This is the other one. My god, did I cry at the end of this one. See, the thing is, when I read this for the first time, I hadn't read I still haven't read the Iliad. It's literally right there on my TBR shelf. But I didn't know the story of the Iliad. I didn't know Achilles' full story. I mean, I knew how his story ended, but I didn't know anything about Patroclus or his story and what happened there. And so I would love to reread it again not knowing all of that. It was such an amazing experience. If you don't know anything about the Iliad or Patroclus or Achilles or the Trojan War, I would recommend reading this before you do, because learning it from this as opposed to like the actual myth, it was emotional, but it was magical. It was wonderful, and I would do anything to have that experience again. I just know that like reading it this time around, knowing what's coming, is gonna make me look at things differently. It's just really good. It's really, really good, and I want to read it again, knowing nothing. And that was the tag. If you have any answers to any of these questions, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this, if you could like and subscribe, it would really help me and my channel out. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!